Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to tackle the problem of political disagreement. We're going to ask how people can have such contrasting views on the same events and policies, and explore what psychology tells us about our ability to see the other side. The divisions we're talking about here could be all sorts of things, like the partisan divide in the US, or the constant conflict between Jewish Israelis and Muslim Palestinians in the Holy Land. Our basic question is, why do good people see things so differently? In saying good people here, I am echoing psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who has a recent book dedicated to this question, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. The premise is that on any side of a political divide, or within almost any group, there are good people. The question is, how can these good people seem apparently insane or evil to each other? For instance, you've probably seen advocates on both sides of the abortion debate do things that seem ridiculous or even downright mean. How does politics do this to good people? Political psychology offers a few answers, and again, the news is not great. First, there are real differences between people and among groups. Remember, that's the basic premise of primordialism. There are different groups, and sometimes their interests conflict, and that causes them to fight. As we learn from constructivism, the boundaries of these groups are very malleable, and people construct them in real times, with changes often occurring. In short, there are lots of raw materials for group conflict. Moreover, when it comes to political matters, researchers have found some interesting trends and differences. Liberals and conservatives differ in terms of basic personality, and these differences seem to appear cross-nationally in similar patterns. This is true at least in the advanced democracies, though in most of the world we don't speak of ideology being liberals versus conservatives, but instead as those on the left and those on the right. However you put it, they differ. Haidt's research in particular looks at moral foundations, and a moral foundation is a consideration that somebody brings up when she's trying to decide what is morally right and wrong. Haidt has found that liberals place an enormous amount of weight on whether something is fair and whether something caused any harm. Conservatives also think that these are important considerations, but not as much as liberals. Instead, they also think of things like maintaining order and purity. Haidt and his colleagues argue that this is the root of a lot of political disagreement. A closely related idea is that people of different partisan stripes differ in terms of their basic value structures, with those on the left being more prone to supporting universalistic policies. Again, we see a greater emphasis on equality for liberals over other considerations that conservatives care about. There are also a range of basic personality traits that differ between liberals and conservatives. For example, research has shown that conservatives score higher on something called conscientiousness, which is acting with discipline and carrying out duty, while liberals are much higher on openness to experience, which is marked by curiosity and a desire to try new things. Finally, there's actually even some very recent work that argues there is a genetic basis to political ideology and that the actual structures of the brains of liberal and conservative people are different. All in all, a fascinating and complicated field, but what we need to keep in mind is that there are some real differences, even within the same ethnic, national, racial, religious group, etc., where primordialism would predict no conflict. There are important psychological differences that can cause great conflict when issues that deal with conflicting values arise. To add to these real differences, we have a tendency to form groups very quickly, and these groups are important explanations of a lot of human behavior. The most interesting case of this is called the minimal group paradigm, which was largely developed by Tajfel. In a research design that turned into something like a real-world Lord of the Flies in short order, Tajfel had boys at summer camp divide into groups randomly. For instance, they might just be told to estimate the number of jelly beans in a jar and then be grouped into those groups who overestimated and those who underestimated. It could also just be based on t-shirt colors or birth dates. Though these differences should not really have any bearing on how the groups treat one another, just these arbitrary divisions were enough to make the boys like those in their group more at the expense of those outside of the group. This was surprising to Tajfel, who had intended to find the line at which groups could cause discrimination by first starting with no differences, which is what he thought he was doing, and then actually introducing real differences. He never got to the point of introducing those real differences. Just the arbitrary difference was enough to cause discriminatory behavior. Now psychologists use this sort of design in their experiments regularly, and they get the same sort of effects. How can this be? Well, if you think about it, we are pack animals. Humans are inherently social, and we are hardwired to stick together and to do what needs to be done to promote the well-being of ourselves and our own. Thus, there is a real human urge to be part of a team. And as we are all a testament to as Buckeyes, group differences that might seem strange to outsiders, such as the difference between Michigan and Ohio State fans, can seem pretty critical to us. A lot of good stuff comes from the fact that we are social animals. Love, altruism, and civilization, just to name a few. But there's also a downside. We are not only hardwired to be group members, we're hardwired to fight for our group. We can justify this when another group is doing something morally wrong, thus that group is immoral or even evil. Of course, when you have a long history of conflict such as the Arab-Israeli quagmire, or if you simply use different values or moral foundations to make moral judgments about what is right and wrong, it can be very easy to see the other group as evil. This, then, is the real problem underlying political battles, and there are no easy solutions. Haidt argues that what we need to do is try to work to come up with another way to look at politics. We need to, what he says, moralize demonization. That is, we need to train ourselves to see it as morally wrong when someone of any group unduly demonizes an opponent. So no matter what side of the fence you are on, and no matter what side of the fence that person who's using this sort of demonizing language is on, we need to train ourselves to see that as something that is morally wrong. This is, of course, a really nice thought, but getting there is easier said than done. One additional issue that helps us understand how people of various group memberships and political stripes can view the same information through such different lenses is called selective exposure. That is, essentially, they actually do view things through different lenses because people on different sides of these debates are typically getting information from different places. This is partly because of confirmation bias, which leads us to like and to seek out sources that comport rather than challenge our own opinion so we can rationalize. However, it is also largely caused by changes in media and information technology. Back in the day, before you or I started paying attention to politics, this guy, Walter Cronkite, gave the CBS Evening News. Now, of course, somebody still delivers the CBS Evening News every night, but they don't have the same kind of following Walter Cronkite did, because there were hardly any other options back in Cronkite's day. There was no cable news, no Facebook, no Tumblr, no Twitter, no RSS feeds, just Walter Cronkite. And what he said was the news for those on the left, and it was the news for those on the right. Now, however, it's hard to find a news source that isn't seen as biased in one way or another. Those on the left can watch MSNBC and read the Huffington Post, and those on the right can watch Fox News and read the Drudge Report. This helps explain greater attitude polarization, as well as a greater sense that the other side of the political spectrum is nothing like your own side of the political spectrum. Finally, as we've hinted in talking about confirmation bias, we create our own feedback loops. We have predispositions that guide our information finding, and then we have a tendency to agree with the information that agrees with us, and to argue away any evidence that contradicts our views. Finally, we also engage in something called selective remembering. When we're called upon to give an opinion about a political candidate or issue, our memory does not yield an unbiased sample. Instead, our biases and heuristics and our mood and a whole host of other variables, both systematic and situational, affect the bits of information that are brought to bear. Well, that concludes our exploration of political psychology. Pretty much a bummer, huh? Is there hope for us? Well, as we see, our democracy gets by, but with major flaws. We are, from the perspective of the ideal democratic citizen, a bit flawed ourselves. But even given our great differences, we still have a lot in common. If we can focus on common goals, we can get stuff done. This is actually backed up by research as well. The way out of group conflict, according to many studies, is to have a big goal that both groups need to work on together to achieve. There are tons of such goals in the US as there are in every other democracy around the world, so the point is focusing on these big goals together and not on what divides us. Finally, by knowing how we can ourselves come to be biased without realizing it, we can be more careful in dealing with political opponents. If groups facing off against one another can work on giving one another the benefit of the doubt, saying that they recognize there are good, reasonable people on each side, and they just see things differently, there can be real dialogue. Demonizing the opposition is an easy way out. It's saying people disagree with you because they're bad, not because there could be a legitimate viewpoint that differs from your own. So don't hate. Well, on that note, I will step off of my soapbox and wish you the best of luck on the quiz. There was a ton of new material in this unit, so get in touch if you have any questions.